Honkai Star Rail has completed one full version cycle, celebrating this occasion with the release of 2.0 and the hotly anticipated world of Penacony, the next area for the main storyline, bringing with it a fantastical atmosphere, new settings, and lots of new characters to no doubt entice the players into saving up for, of which the first two made available to us are Swan and Sparkle, two very interesting characters in their own right. Now, a point of discussion that Star Rail players have brought up throughout version 1, despite it being far too soon to tell, is whether this game is advancing its power scaling at a faster pace than Genshin, compounded by the more simplistic, almost binary elements to its gameplay, making it more likely for market share to be contested between units, and the question of power creep appears to be more probable for this game. Today I want to bring that discussion to light, as well as address whether Honkai Star Rail is or isn't power creeping by presenting arguments for either side. Let's begin by going over the causality behind this sentiment. Gacha games are notorious for power creeping more than most other genres as a result of its monetization system. The more practical value a character has, the more incentive they have to be sought after, thus increasing sales. So gacha developers have a financial motive to play into power creep, since if units are weaker than a player's existing units, there's not much of a reason to pull for them. The other aspect that drives power creep is, of course, the necessity of pulling for them. Genshin's allowed to make do with serviceable characters on account of there being almost no semblance of difficulty whatsoever, releasing only maybe 1, 2, maximum of 3 meta-defining units per version, while everyone else is seen as optional. In terms of absolute value, if you have characters like Alhaitham, Nahida, Nivelette, Nilou, etc., you can very easily skip every other banner since those units effortlessly clear the entire game handcuffed and blindfolded. For the sake of giving you something to visualize, the cutoff point for Genshin is more lenient than Star Rail. We can say top 70 percentiles considered meta, arbitrarily speaking. Star Rail is no Fire Emblem Heroes or Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, where the next banner is twice as powerful as the one that came before, but they do set off the radar a bit more conspicuously than Genshin. With the absence of meaningful extrinsic sources of damage in Star Rail, such as elemental reactions inflating your DPS, most of your performance hinges on the characters themselves, resulting in each one's individual output playing a bigger part in determining whether you can pass or fail the game's content. Speaking of content, while Genshin has only Spiral Abyss to fall back on, and even then, it's only really floor 12, Star Rail has 3 types of endgame content: Memory of Chaos, Star Rail's equivalent of Spiral Abyss; Pure Fiction, a wave battle gauntlet that challenges your ability to clear as many enemies as possible in a set number of turns; and finally Swarm Disaster, a roguelike dungeon crawl game mode that has you accumulate buffs and items to face off against increasingly difficult opponents. Though none of these modes are stifling enough to be uncompletable by free-to-play players, one thing is for certain. The ceiling of Honkai Star Rail's endgame difficulty reaches measurably higher than Genshin's, both in scope and diversity. You not only have to build units that can rush through bosses quickly, but you have to build units who can wave clear, units who can sustain themselves in long protracted fights, and so on. Team building is of greater import in Star Rail as players need to optimize their party slots, skill points, and rotations to ensure a comfortable clear while paying attention to the changes in each endgame area, since brute force isn't as viable of a strategy compared to Genshin. Naturally, players are more inclined to keep tabs on new characters and what they have to offer that are conducive to a more efficient clear, because the game itself demands it. The first units released in a gacha determine the relative benchmark of power scaling, not necessarily the objective benchmark, but a reference point on where to start. In version 1.0, the first 2 event banners featured Seele and Jingyuan, establishing the baseline of what to expect from a 5-star damage dealer. Shortly after, we were introduced to the couple supports, Silver Wolf and Luocha, doing the same for their respective fields. You'll notice, however, that every first character of their type was conclusively the best in that field, or damn near close to it. Luocha was magnitudes more effective than Bailu or Natasha. Seele made Yanqing and Dan Heng look like 3 stars in comparison. Jingyuan crushed Himiko, Serval, and Herta in performance. Silver Wolf doesn't really count as she was the first of her kind, unless you want to compare her to Well, to which I personally wouldn't. Continuing on, we were given Kafka, the centerpiece of any team specializing in damage over time, then Blade, who was easily the best destruction unit at the time he came out, which didn't last very long. Typically, the first year or so of a gacha service prioritizes rounding out all the different classes, and while Star Rail certainly did that, their method of approach was pretty cavalier, frankly speaking. They did follow suit by introducing a tank option for players, healing option, buffer, debuffer, damage dealer, but what they also did was make each of those options significantly better than what was available at the time. A nice gesture, mind you, but they progressed very quickly. Around 1.3 is when I would say comments pertaining to power creep began to surface. Fushan's release was a tempestuous one. A tank with persistent cover, self-sustenance, party healing, and even some buffs made her look extremely overloaded. Then came Lunai Dan Heng, who was even stronger than Blade. Then in version 4 we had Jingliu, who was essentially Lunai Dan Heng but easier to play and use. Then in 1.5 we had Argenti, the strongest erudition unit to date, and then Huohuo, who alongside providing no shortage of healing can passively dispel, boost your DPS, and battery your entire team, making a solid case for her outstripping Luocha as a healer. 1.6 took things a step further by introducing Dr. Ratio, outclassing Seela in single-target combat, although you'd be hard-pressed to call Seela a single-target specialist, as I find her being more of an erudition unit at this point with the sleeping ability. Back on topic though, Renmei, the first widely accessible Harmony character, and what a character she is. Up until that point, many consider Bronya to be the best support in the game by leaps and bounds, and potentially even the best character in the game. Renmei became the first character to challenge that position, something no one else has come close to doing outside of maybe Fu Xuan. Version 2.0's first entrants, Black Swan and Sparkle, add to this conjecture by pressing the support ceiling to new heights and lengths. Though she's in a very niche category, Black Swan has heavily amplified the capabilities of dot teams, pushing Kafka on the same level of strength as the game's best characters when even on her own she already made for a solid rogue strategy. In addition, Swan basically has Starl's equivalent of Genshin's Veritas Inventor 4-piece bonus with her E1, like almost an exact one-to-one copy. And finally, Sparkle. Sparkle's what compelled me to make this video in the first place actually. Remember when I said that Bronya was in contention for the best character in the game? The reason for that is her sheer amplification and up until now, unique function. She can increase the damage dealt from an ally by a staggering 66%, increase the attack of her entire team by 55%, and crit damage equal to 16% of her own, plus a flat 20%, which when decently built is around the ballpark of 50% total crit damage. While those buffs are indeed impressive, it's her turn refresh that cements her as the best support, forfeiting her own action to give another party member the chance to act again, allowing for a myriad of options, from effectively doubling the DPS of your carry, to saving your team from certain death by having the tank or healer act before the enemy unleashes a massive attack, to squeezing out that last bit of energy a teammate needs so you can unleash a massive combo. The amount of use cases for a turn refresh is too numerous to mention. That's what makes it so powerful. While inevitably Bronya was going to be succeeded by someone down the line, I wasn't expecting it to happen so soon. Sparkle has a similar property where she gives bonus crit damage based on a portion of her own plus a flat amount. In exchange for giving more crit damage, she only affords it to one target. But when sufficiently built, you could potentially give more than 100% bonus crit damage to a single ally. And she also advances that teammate's action by 50%. Despite appearing to be only half as good as a full turn advance, in practice they're almost essentially the same. As for the rest of her skills, they literally break open the constraints of Starl's gameplay. While present in battle, the max number of SP increases to 7, and Sparkle gives bonus damage to her entire team each time a skill point is consumed, up to a cap of 18% and rank 10. Furthermore, with her ultimate, she instantly recovers 4 SP for the team and amplifies her talent's damage amp from 6% per stack to 16 for a total of 48% damage. Think about this for a moment. Since the beginning of Starl, one of the core facets of its combat is SP conservation. The more SP efficient units are, the better. It's why Fu Xuan, Luocha, and Renmei are so valuable because they only need 1 SP every 3 turns, if that. Sparkle throws that entire notion on its head, encouraging you to spend SP, not conserve it, by giving you more than most parties know what to do with, and that's in tandem with the massive amount of crit damage and total damage. It wouldn't be a stretch to say Sparkle is the strongest character in the game. She gives just as much offensive capability to her carry, if not more, than the likes of Bronya and Renmei, on top of shattering the limitations imposed on you by increasing the max amount of SP you can work with and refilling your supply extremely easily. Unlike Genshin, whose characters are limited by cooldowns, Starl is limited by energy costs and skill points, of which the latter is alleviated by Sparkle. Given everything I said so far, it's entirely plausible that Starl is indeed witnessing power creep, possibly more than is needed or even healthy for the game. Not only are new units coming out who can achieve greater heights than their predecessors, but they can also do it more consistently, for less investment, and more easily. Qingliu packs the same kind of DPS Unai Danheng can dish out, but without the hassle of SP management. Renmei gives tons of buffs just by existing. You don't have to worry about turn management or timing or anything, just turn your brain off and she works. We are at a point where, barring a select few characters, most version 1 units are either barely holding on to meta relevance or have been shoved out. For players who lack every 5-star in the game, they might still use characters like Su Sheng, Qingche, Natasha, and whatnot, but if they had all the 5 stars, they likely would not be using them. Starl's version 1 units are not at the same level as Genshin's Power 5, that's for sure, and many of its 5 stars are also struggling to keep up with this progression. Another argument in favor of power creep is the comparatively more binary nature of Starl's combat, like I mentioned earlier. With its turn-based gameplay, there's less room for mechanical expression and combo creativity than that of a real-time action RPG. As such, combat in Starl is all about numbers and turn order, making it significantly easier to achieve the maximum output of a unit, whereas trying to achieve maximum results in Genshin is much more inconsistent due to a lot more moving parts and fluctuating aspects that can change at a moment's notice. You may have gotten the wrong reaction, you might have accidentally bursted after your character's buff wore off, enemies flew away from where you wanted them to be, things of that nature. In Starl, simulations and calculations are more applicable because you can consistently replicate them in practice. With this in mind, every unit has set value and contributions, with the only difference coming down to what elemental weaknesses the enemies have and how many enemies there are. Continuing on with that, Renmei, Bronya, Tingyun, Pela, Silverwolf, etc. can all be graded on the same basis, how much they add to your team's overall DPS. Likewise for carries, how much damage they can do. The Jingliu and Dr. Ratio are different paths. They can be directly weighed against each other in single target, multi-target, etc. Though Bronya and Silver Wolf specialize in buffing and debuffing respectively, ultimately it comes down to how much damage they let their carries do per turn. Beyond the scope of units, light cones are also something to make note of. It's very apparent that light cones are growing in strength. Comparing early light cones to future ones, the difference is staggering. As a quick example, Bronya's signature weapon gives 10% energy and recovers 1 SP every other cast of the user's ultimate, on top of giving 30% more damage to the next ally when using a skill. Not too bad, until you look at Sparkle's. It grants 32% crit damage to herself, which remember she can disperse among the rest of her team, and passively grants all allies 10% crit rate and 28% crit damage for basically the entirety of battle thanks to a generous activation and maintenance cost. Aside from the SP recovery, Bronya's light cone is just totally outclassed by Sparkle's. There's a lot of evidence supporting that indeed, Starl is power creeping. The game's environment makes it easier for characters to overshadow one another, while characters themselves are ostensibly one-upping each other. Moreover, many of these units feel like one-size-fits-all characters who can work for any party and any team, increasing the likelihood of a monopoly. It doesn't paint a very friendly picture given there's a lot of endgame content pressuring the need for these all-purpose units too. But what are some possible factors that suggest Starl isn't power creeping? For one, ironically, Sparkle. A character that got majorly buffed from her addition is Blade, who following his release has been overshadowed by other damage dealers. However, he's one of the best carries to use with Sparkle, elevating his position in the meta. Not just her, but also Black Swan. Like I said, Kafka's always been a decent unit, but her niche playstyle and need for a completely separate team to be built has, in my opinion, been holding her back, at least compared to more straightforward damage dealers. Black Swan has added more incentive to build a Kafka team, and the two Nihility mommies are a fine pair at that. One way to increase the power scaling of a game while minimizing the effects of power creep is through inclusivity. Power creep is defined as a situation where successive updates or expansions to a game introduce more powerful units or abilities, leaving the older ones underpowered. It's that last part, leaving the older ones underpowered, that makes all the difference. It's true there are units who have lost a lot of market share, very quickly I might add. Then again, several units have been given a second opportunity. The advent of Pure Fiction breathed new life into her edition, substantially increasing the usability of characters like Himeko, Serval, and Herta. And while Starl is introducing many Sasami knives, they're releasing an equal amount of niche units, Topaz and Black Swan to name a few. Consequently, a number of existing units are getting retroactively buffed, so while yes, the game is increasing in power, they're doing so in a way that allows many of them to benefit from it. The wide selection of endgame content also does a good job keeping things under control. If it were just Memory of Chaos, then power creep would be a far bigger issue. But Swarm Disaster's many paths make it easier for less popular units to have their 5 seconds of fame. Chief of all, Pure Fiction presents an entirely different game mode with entirely different win conditions, creating more scenarios for units with unconventional strengths to excel. Rounding this all out is the very essence of turn-based games itself. Since everything ultimately comes down to numbers, it prevents units from overstepping boundaries. In a vacuum, Argenti might be stronger than Himeko, but if they make the next Pure Fiction or MOC buff catered towards fire element units, then his advantage over her holds no water because there's only so much he can do in a single turn. It's not that he's so much stronger than Himeko to where he can ignore everything and just brute force. So they can level the playing field through circumstances too, even if it is artificial and temporary. As it stands, my overall conclusion of the video's title is this: Starl is power creeping, undeniably faster than Genshin, but it's currently manageable. It is still within a reasonable speed to where older units can keep up. The difficulty of the game is still lenient enough for even average units to be viable even if alternatives are more efficient. All the same, they're skirting a fine line. With how ambitious they're being with every new unit, if they're not careful, it could escalate out of control, so it would benefit them to be prudent and keep a close eye on every character they release in version 2. But what about you guys? Which side are you on? Do you think Starl is power creeping too fast for your comfort, or are you currently okay with how things are? Let me know in the comments down below. That's gonna be it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Honkai Starl discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.